Yeah. Hey,
Hello.
everybody.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Lovely to see you all.
Nice to see you again so soon.
I know, but it's been like it's been a thing a day. There's been like a
It
thing a
certainly
day.
has.
Like the first day was Ed Balls, looking at Kathleen Stock as if she was someone from Westboro Church, which was the most extraordinary piece of television. And then there was
But actually, even that Ed Balls thing was interesting, wasn't it? Because he seemed so convinced of his own righteousness. He really seemed to have the same beliefs. Like, well, no, a woman can't have a penis.
It was like, what do you think you were just talking about for the last 5 minutes?
But I think he felt that his beliefs are sort of virtuous and correct, whereas ours are not for some reason. And I think and there's a fundamental issue here, isn't there? The people who have been talking about it for a long time, actually, like us, raising it, because of the vilification we've had, it still seems that although people are coming along saying, well, no, of course I believe that, but you're just doing it in an unkind way. You're talking about it too much. You're just saying.
No, I would tweak that a little bit, Helen. I think it's not even that. It's like we are mentioning it at all. The problem with our beliefs is that they are stated. That's the problem with them. Unlike someone like Ed Balls, who manages to get through a whole interview without telling us anything he believes about this issue beyond, here's another thing. I mean, I don't want to jump back and forth. I want to be careful because we have to talk about the documentary as a separate thing. But I realized again watching that documentary how the words trans people are still being used without anyone ever explaining what the word means.
Yeah.
We're just constantly being told about trans people, and there is no distinction between, someone who puts on black fingernail polish and appears on Only Connect, and someone who goes through like an irreversible surgery that changes their life, for a very small amount of people for the better, but for I would say a lot more who are being misdiagnosed for the worst.
Yeah, there are two former friends that this has happened to, where I have the exact same views as they do, but they couldn't agree that they were TERFs. And one of them had even stronger, more extreme views than mine. One of them was like, we should absolutely abolish any gender surgeries for anyone under the age of 25. And I was like, I don't even go that far. And they're like, but you're a TERF. And it's like, you have more hardline views than I do, but I'm an evil TERF, and you're the loving, trans accepting person. It was like, so it's all about the sort of spiritual sense of one's own positioning oneself on some kind of like, I feel virtuous, therefore I must be virtuous.
Yeah.
And it's not about what I actually believe, it's just how I identify. I identify as pro-trans, so you must be transphobic. Kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. It is that sort of smug self-righteousness. And also well, I think I do know what most people think. And you're like, that's just amazing.
And Kathleen Stock's, under him, I could see that, which was hilarious.
Yes. So she was very good. I think she was very fluent and very calm.
Yes.
And she responded very well. But it was interesting when she said, well, if you look at polling, and as soon as she mentioned polling, he literally actually did visually roll his eyes. And that was interesting as well, because again, it's that feeling of self-righteousness, isn't it? Like, he doesn't need polling because he knows. And it is a massive problem. This whole thing is sort of characterized with misinformation and smug self-belief.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like she mentioned 3 things in that interview, and she got it all out. It was a great, nice, clean moment where I think you've probably seen it. It was the one that went viral, where she basically said, I'm offended. I'm offended by things like men in women's prisons. I'm offended by children getting irreversible medical procedures. Those 3 examples, and sports, I think she mentioned, those 3 things delivered together are just an impeccable argument.
Yes.
It's possibly the core of it. you know, because you're talking about safeguarding in relation to women's spaces, which prisons is the most extreme example of. You're talking about sports where, again, one of the few places where trans activist rights clash with women's rights. But it is a clash, and it's a major clash. And it's, you know, women are leaving their sports. Cyclists are leaving their sports because of it, you know. And then the third thing is, of course, the irreversible procedures and the fact that most trans surgeries are experimental. There was a very good point made by someone who we used to be a friend of the show, but I don't know, all sorts of weird things happened. But Exi Lancic had a brilliant point once about the documentary about Jazz Jennings. He said that, or she said, excuse me, that there's a shot of the two doctors during Jazz Jennings' operation, and they're arguing. And she said, I'll tell you why they're arguing, because this is an experimental surgery. Yeah. You know, and it's such an amazing point. And all these people, and I'll go on to that in a second. There's something kind of very crucial about Stephen Whittle in last night's documentary that needs to be pointed out. Very sad, but very important. But all these people are kind of, you know, people like Ed Balls, to put him to use this to put him to one side so we can move on. But people like Ed Balls are playing their own part in keeping this information from the very people who need to hear it.
Yeah.
You know, from trans men, you know, especially, I think, you know.
I think there's one more point picking up on something that you said there. It did occur to me when, what's the woman's name? Kirsty something was saying, but, you know, you're upsetting people. And I think this is genuinely, I think, one of the only political movements where the other side believe a valid counter argument is you're actually upsetting people. I mean, it's politics, for Christ's sake. It upsets everyone all of the time. But this is the only one where people actually use it as an argument, as if I say that you're upsetting people, then you'll be quiet. It is really incredible. And I can't help thinking that a lot of it is because, you know, the roots of it has come from women. And it was, you know, be kind, and the anger and the fury about women actually saying no.
Yes. It's been very unpopular, Helen. You're saying no.
Yes,
there's another factor in this too, which is that, totally. But I think another thing is that a lot of people, fundamentally, gender dysphoria is about having feelings that don't jibe with reality. So gender dysphoria, right at its core, is almost when you turn it into an identity, you're protecting your feelings against facts as a core fundamental value. So the gender movement is all about, literally at the base of it, is that we have feelings that don't jibe with facts. Therefore, facts are bad. It's almost it's very religious-like, because religion is often counterfactual to facts. You know, people can't arise from the dead, that kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Burning wishes can't talk to you, that kind of thing. So there's a very kind of religious belief system right at the core. And if we're moving into the documentary,
yes, let's do.
There was a I haven't watched it all. I skimmed through it because I have a hard time watching these kind of entry level kind of things, you know, because we're so deep in the woods when you have to go all the way back and watch something that's meant for like beginners. And it can be so grating on the nerves, you know, like, what are they saying? That's all wrong. But I got through some of it. Sorry, yeah.
First. Well, I did. Yeah, like, go ahead. You had a point to make first, but I'll.
Early on, there's a trans man who said that the language being used about this person was so dehumanizing, and I just had to pause and kind of fume in an almost sympathetic way, but angry, in that there's nothing more humanizing than looking at a trans man, someone like Stephen Whittle or this person in the documentary, and saying, you are female, recognizing that you're looking at a female who is experiencing gender dysphoria. Anyone who says that they're a trans man is telling you that their human experience is that they are a very atypical female who has distress about their female sex. There's nothing more humanizing than acknowledging that that person's sex is not what they wish that it was. And there's a real disconnect between, like, how can you argue all day long that you're just a guy like all the other guys, and at the same time say my being trans is the most important distinguishing feature about me? These things don't make sense. It's deeply humanizing to try to understand why these people feel the way that they do. It just made me so angry. Anyway, sorry, that was
Actually, that's a really good point, actually. So it's not. I hadn't thought about it that way. But you do have a point there.
Can I talk a little bit about the entry level aspect of it? I was dreading it for the same reason, and I heard Gareth Roberts, who's a tweeter I really enjoy at the moment. His stuff is just great, both GC stuff, but also very funny stuff about the old days of television. But Gareth said something like, "I can't bear these documentaries with the kind of plinky plonk piano, and you know." But here's the thing. I think it was actually a really smart documentary. It played it very, very soberly. It was very dry. It even said a lot of things that I just don't agree with. Like there was from my perspective, far too much both sidesism. The words both sides were being used a lot. I did notice they're being used a lot by one particular side, but and yet for all that, I can see why Stephen Whittle and all these people were so furiously angry. Because, I mean, when you think of it, Julie Bindel, I remember when I was just being cancelled and stuff, I remember actually pausing before going to follow Julie Bindel, because so complete was the air around her that she'd done something wrong.
Yeah.
I wasn't educated at that stage, so I didn't know what was happening. That I just felt she was someone who was so beyond the pale that I better be careful. Like, I guess there are some people who are transphobic. I guess Julie Bindel would be one of them. That's how naive I was. And I didn't realize that in fact Julie had been so thoroughly cancelled for 15 years that she was off the map in a lot of ways, you know. So for them to have, you know, a good 15 minutes of Julie Bindel speaking uninterruptedly, and Stock, just both talking absolute sense, showing that their concern is for women and girls, that must have driven them on the other side insane. Because up until now, the argument is there is no argument. Up until now, the argument is these women are so beyond the pale that you can't even hear what they're saying.
Well, I thought there was an interesting thing today that I think it was Maya pointed it out, that some of the people who were in the documentary, I think Finn McKay was one of them. Actually, they issued a statement today saying that they hadn't realized that it was going to be so, you know, basically a documentary about Kathleen Stock. And Maya pointed out that actually it isn't. That's not the problem here. The problem is that because it was balanced to a large extent, that they've had to issue the statement to appease their own side, lest they are turned on and said and being accused of, you know.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting point.
That makes a lot of sense.
That makes sense. You know, has Artie gone somewhere?
No, maybe he's having connection problems. Or the last person he killed is bleeding into the wall. So look, well, actually, this is an important one. So I'll wait for Artie to come back. He's probably rebooting. But let's just talk about one. I saw there was an early person on, a trans man, very personable, as these kind of trans men tend to be. You know, I was looking at him kind of getting the choir together, and I kind of thought, you know, it's a woman who thought they needed to transition before they could be like that. You know, I felt a lot of compassion for that person. But they said at the start something that really hit me. They said, we're discussed as a problem to be solved, you know? And it was like, no, you have a problem and we're trying to discuss it. You know, you have taken testosterone, which has given you facial hair, changed your body structure, your facial structure, it's deepened your voice, but it will also bring you into the menopause early, you know, and there are a number of kind of, I'm not sure what the word is, concurrent things that go along with this. Like, for instance, testosterone is known to have an effect on the blood vessels or the heart muscles or something like that. But it's not good for women. It's not good for women long term.
And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because honestly, if you are an adult and you want to take drugs, I'm not going to prevent you. But it does matter when this sort of medicalization is sort of portrayed as trans joy and how excellent it is. And it's so simple and easy. You can just become a man when we know it isn't. We know there's a huge amount of issues around it. And like genuinely, I don't think it produces sort of well-adjusted adults. It doesn't seem to. And to promote this as something good that schools are picking up on and kids are picking up on is the issue. Like, do what you want to your own body, but perpetuating this.
Yeah, to go back to that trans man who was saying that it was dehumanizing to talk about their sex. It was like, again, I understand that this person experienced deep gender dysphoria, and for them, undergoing medical transition could have alleviated them, but that's not necessarily the case for everyone else. People who experience gender dysphoria, if your outcome is to become a trans man, or your outcome is to alleviate your gender dysphoria and to be a woman, and very often a lesbian woman, these two things are perhaps like the identities are morally equal, but they're not medically equal. To be medicalized for life as a trans man is not the same thing as to resolve this without all the medical conditions. These are not equivalent. And it's not discriminatory to say if somebody's experiencing gender dysphoria, it is much more preferable for them to alleviate their dysphoria without medicalizing their bodies and becoming trans than it is to do so. If somebody has to do so, if somebody undertakes that pathway to alleviate their dysphoria, okay, we can work with that. We can try to understand that and be empathetic, but it's not an ideal situation to be in. And I think a lot of adult transsexual, old school transsexuals recognize that. And that's why they're so alarmed at this push to put kids onto the trans pathway, because it may have worked for them and they may be proud to be trans and to have gone through what they've gone through. But at the same time, they recognize that it's not an ideal outcome and it's not an ideal situation. It's not something we should glorify.
Because yesterday, I mean, we haven't touched on this either, which was that woman protesting Kathleen's interview at Oxford by gluing her hand to
let's bring that one into this discussion about the documentary.
And wearing the T-shirt saying "No more dead trans kids."
Yeah.
And that's interesting in itself, isn't it? Because what is a trans kid? Because as we've, it's pushing the idea that kids are innately trans, as opposed to trans being an action that you take. And that, being trans is just as reasonable and good and righteous as being cis, which is a word I will not use. But it isn't, is it? I mean, it isn't. It's something that it's a label that you take on because you're uncomfortable, because you're unhappy. It's not something that is just, it's not who you are. It is a thing that you do. If you didn't need to do anything, it wouldn't be a thing. It requires actually doing something.
Yeah, but it also gives you control. When we shifted from LGBT to LGBTQ, what we did is we took away the acknowledgement that your sex and your sexual orientation are parts of your body that you have to learn to deal with. You are a thinking machine. You have a cerebral cortex, a high-functioning, executive functioning brain, where you can control your thoughts, you can control your ideas, you can control yourself, you can conceptualize and make all these this is what makes us different from all the other animals in the animal kingdom, is our high-functioning cerebral cortexes, our critical thinking faculties of conceptualizing and blah, 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 blah. But our sexual orientation and our sex are down on the body level. We're ultimately driving this machine, and that machine is either gay or straight or male or female. But when we went from LGB to LGBTQ, we thought that you decide which letter you are. You figure out which one. I should back up for a second. When you suddenly realize that you're driving this machine that's female when you're going into puberty, and it's scaring the crap out of you because you're getting this unwanted sexual attention, you're going to have to learn to deal with it. You can't just change to a different machine. And if you suddenly realize that you're becoming sexually aroused at fellow females and not at males at all, You can't change that. Oh shit, I'm driving a lesbian female machine. This is my life now, you know. But LGBTQ means you're supposed to, you can conceptualize your machine any way you want. So if you suddenly realize you're driving a lesbian female machine, you just say, I come out of the closet as a trans man. Now I'm not driving a lesbian female machine. Now I'm driving a heterosexual male machine. And it's sort of giving people this agency to pick whatever letter they want. And the scary thing about LGBTQ is you're letting gays and women identify out of their bodies while celebrating their bodies. Oh, you're part of the LGBTQ still. You're still part of the rainbow, but they're actually trying to get away from their identities. Yeah. Does that make any sense? So it's really scary. We're conceptualizing something as in our control when it's not in our control. Our sex and our sexuality are not in our control at all. And LGBTQ is a way of saying, oh, you're still part of the gay rainbow when you're actually trying to completely conceptualize yourself away from what part of the rainbow you're in.
And I'll tell you what that comes from, I think, is a very deep nihilism about the future of the planet, you know? I mean, I genuinely think that kids just feel that they've lost control of the climate, that humanity has lost control of the climate. So at least they can exercise this tiny portion of control over themselves, even though it's a kind of, it's an illusion.
I think but it's more than that, isn't it? It's,
I'm saying it's just one.
No, but it's not just control of themselves. It's actually trying to control other people as well. And I do think that this is a big part of it. I do think that a lot of it is the joy, the smugness, the self-serving, smug joy in believing yourself to be moral and virtuous, whereas others are not. And really, it's such a lovely opportunity to show yourself off as being good and righteous and progressive, and you get to call old women bigots.
Yeah. Let me just show this quote that someone just said. I was told in court by was this Rianne who won recently in Denmark? Is that right?
Yes, I think so. Right.
Oh, hello, Rianne. Lovely to see you. I was in court by a colleague failing to explain why I should be fired. That it's unacceptable to share research on medical transition unless the premise is believing trans kids. And that brings me to Stephen Whittle, because there's a couple of things I noticed about Stephen Whittle. The first is that I really don't know what pronouns to use for Whittle, because I have a lot of sympathy for Whittle, but anyway, Whittle is a trans-identified female who has a white mustache, white hair, looks like a perfectly normal old man, you know. But I noticed two things. I noticed that on the program last night, and Kilroy, he used the suicide line twice, you know, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. The appearance on Kilroy, that's the first time they were beginning to float this one, you know, because as we know, the threat of suicide and fake statistics about suicide are being used in so many different ways. Like, it's been used as a kind of gotcha in arguments, but it's also being used by kids who are trying to get hormones from their doctors. You know, the threat of suicide is often actually said by other trans rights activists to be a kind of a fast track to getting the drugs that you want, you know. Those were two things I noticed. And I also noticed that Whittle was talking about the serious decisions he had to make. And one of those decisions, he said, you know, the decision to have kids, you know, because he knew he wouldn't be able to have kids if he went this route. But the thing is, what he doesn't say, and what isn't really pointed out in the documentary, which I think is interesting, is that Whittle has multiple sclerosis. She's been open about this, so I'm not giving anything away. But multiple sclerosis has been tagged by a number of organizations as being a possible result of these experimental drugs that are being given to kids. So this is testosterone on the effect of a female body. It was enough for one. I'm trying to find it. Hold on one sec. It was enough for one magazine or one kind of journal of medicine to talk about it as if it was enough evidence for multiple sclerosis bodies to be concerned they need to figure out how to meet the needs of this group, right? And then I was also sent two stories of both of trans men who have multiple sclerosis much earlier than, you would think these are very healthy looking young men. They look like young men. But It is a thing. So here's my question, Stephen Whittle. Did Stephen Whittle know when he was making that decision as a young person that this would be in his future? And of course he didn't, because there's no fucking evidence. There's no experiments. There's nothing. This is just a live experiment that's happening on these people right now, and we're not allowed to speak about it. It's really shocking. And for someone like Whittle to use the suicide line while also not making it clear that this multiple sclerosis is an aspect of his his decision, or at least there's a chance it could be, I feel like that's lying by omission. You have to be open about what the risks are.
Well, I imagine Whittle, I mean, there's no, it's not definite, is it? So it can be ignored, I think, is the answer. But you're right. All of these things should be way more studied than they are. I mean, it's, again, it was the most shocking thing that the Tavistock, they didn't even really keep proper records of, there's no records, no real proper follow-ups anywhere. It's been the most shocking thing. There's been many shocking aspects, like many shocking aspects, but that has been one of them.
But how dehumanizing is that? How dehumanizing is it that they're not doing any research? Women were always fighting to get more research on women's bodies because the research was always on men's bodies. Gay people wanted more research on, but we want research done, and this is one group that doesn't want that, and it's like they don't want to acknowledge their humanity or their condition.
Here's my thing about it all, right? What people don't realize when they watch a program like the one last night and they think both sides and all this sort of stuff, they don't realize that the people on our side are fighting for these people who are going through these things, are actually trying. Kathleen made a glancing mention of it early on in the thing, but she said that so she said, oh God, what was it? She said something like, I can't remember. She was saying something like it is us who's trying. I can't. It was something like.
Well, it's like that slogan, isn't it? Protect trans kids.
Yes.
And it genuinely, you can, both sides could have that slogan.
Oh, I know what it was, Helen. Sorry. What it was she pointed out the lie of calling women TERFs, because trans exclusionary radical feminist means they exclude trans men, and they don't. They don't at all. They've got deep concern for what's happening to trans men, because we see trans men, I say we, even though I'm just an ally, but we see trans men as suffering from misogyny, whether it's internalized misogyny at a hypersexualized world that they want to bow out of, or whatever, or whether it's just, these bizarre stereotyped ideas of what girls can do and boys can do,
I've been talking about those stereotype ideas. I mean, I've seen like the most extraordinary reaction to to Stock. Like so many people on the other side saying, but she could be a trans man. She could be a man. She looks like a trans man. And it's genuinely shocking to me that they still don't seem to understand the arguments. And that's how good the propaganda has been, I think, about TERFs. It's, what people think first and foremost is that we're just horrible bigots, and the arguments really aren't considered.
This is what I mean.
It's anything other than or it's whatever somebody wants to believe that you believe. I saw somebody today saying, look, does anyone think that, Stock might as well just be a trans man? Yet she's arguing against it. I don't understand it. And somebody responded saying, no, you're entirely wrong. Actually, we don't. You can be whoever you like, but your sex is your sex. But stereotypes don't define your sex. And this woman responded saying, well, yes, I believe that, but you don't.
You don't. Yeah. Well, when this posho guy ambushes Kathleen at the start of the speech, he says a thing that, again, I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but he says, "Let me be absolutely clear." And then he says about the attitudes to trans people. If you want to be absolutely clear, first tell us what trans people are. you know? And you can't say, well, they're people who feel, or their gender is this or that. You can't say any of that because we don't believe in gender. We don't believe in it, that you have a sex personality, you know? We don't believe it. So you're going to have to find some way of actually explaining who this group of people are, who we're supposed to hate, who we're trying to get the data to, while you are trying to block people from talking about it.
Yes.
You know, people like that posh guy, they will remember these years with great shame. They really will, because they were the ones who stopped.
I don't think they will. I think they're just justified to themselves. Like Owen Jones, he wrote an article today, didn't he, in the Guardian, about the rise of the terrible rise of the far right, and really all it shows is that what they've been trying to push in an undemocratic way has proven so unpopular with the public that he has to justify it himself by saying, "Oh well, everyone else is just far right."
Yeah,
that's all he's got. That's all he's got is if you don't believe my stuff, you're just a bigoted far right person. I'm not sure that anyone is ever going to say, "Oh no, I was entirely wrong." They will just look at us and say, "Yes, but they just argued it badly." I mean, fundamentally, they may have had some points, but then, it's kind of what we believe. Just like Ed Balls with his, "Well, no, of course I don't believe a woman."
Yeah, exactly.
But you're still upsetting people.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny, the whole thing, we're calling everyone the far right if they're your enemy. My extended family did the opposite. My family is from Texas, and they would call everything communist. And everything became increasingly more and more communist. To the point, and they were so far right themselves that they were like, they had to stop watching Fox News because Fox News was too communist. Rush Limbaugh was too communist for them. He was the big one at the time. Like these people, they were just like, the more extreme they got, the more it was just everyone else is a commie. Commies everywhere. My entire family uprooted in the 1970s and shipped themselves off to Australia because Texas had become too communist. 6 months later, they moved right back because Australia was full of commies. So it's the same thing when you become ideologically fixated on something. Everyone else has moved too far the other way. So Owen Johns and all these people, kind of wokesters, talking about how everything's moved to the far right. No, you've just gone crazy. That's the problem.
Colin Wright,
the exact mirror image of my Texas family.
Colin Wright did a great illustration that pointed out that way that we've all been staying still, and the left has just gone so far in one bizarre direction that we don't know what's going on anymore. But I wanted to talk about one thing that one of the trans-identified men said. First of all, I thought it was so funny that these two clear men with long hair, both incredibly posh, talking about how they weren't going to go and see Kathleen, not because of what she was going to say, but because of the things she means. That was really interesting. Even they have to admit that she doesn't say anything. It's just that she secretly means it in a way that they never really tell us. But another thing I thought was actually quite
dog whistle has it's just I mean it's just the name of the game now, isn't it?
Yes,
If you can't,
that's why Kathleen is the most.
If you can't argue against it any other way, if you don't, if you really want to believe that your opponents are evil bigots, you just say, "Well, no, it's just dog whistling."
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it, though, absolutely, it's a kind of it's all based on that, and that's again why I thought it was such a quietly devastating documentary, because even though it was entry level, boy, they really just let all these guys hang themselves. They none of, like, the arguments were often completely contradictory. There was one trans-identified man, and he was talking about how he had such a terrible time deciding which toilets to go to that he had to go home, and it just stayed the rest of the night at home. And none of them have a clue that this is the position they're putting women in, because women won't know which toilets they could go into. Women won't know what toilets are safe. And they're putting women in that position. But there's no acknowledgement of this. Again, later on, he says something like, "There's only a few people this affects." And then 2 scenes later, he's talking about all his trans friends. It's like, so there's a gang of you want to use the women's toilets. What's going on? Is it no one? Is it everyone? They just basically say anything that can help them get what they want at any particular time.
Yeah, well, hence the, no more dead trans kids T-shirt.
Yes.
The implication there already is that there's absolutely fucking loads of them, like everywhere. And and Kathleen is the problem. That's why she's there on the floor. But really, what she's doing
because
is
Kathleen is for dead kids. We all know
it's
that.
self-promotion,
Are
isn't
you
it?
pro or anti-dead kids?
Yeah, exactly. But it's just self-promotion. Like she's been doing protests, like she's done Stop Oil protests. Her dad's a protester, like a professional protester. It's obvious, just self-promotion, and this whole, the whole movement allows itself to do that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's like I was saying earlier, it's just smug self-righteousness, just that lovely feeling of smug self-righteousness that you can get at pointing at other people and saying, look, as you was just saying, look, they're not against dead trans kids.
Yeah. And it's all posh people. It's all posh people. Like that show last night, the two young blokes sitting around the table, both of them posh. The woman last night at the Roz thing, she's like the daughter of a CEO or something what was it?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's just hilarious, So these people. Oh yeah, here she goes. Trans activist Riz Posnett says she is working class. Her school fees were $41,000 per year. Her home is 6 bedrooms. She's been on several exotic foreign holidays. Her Extinction Rebellion father worked for the World Bank. You know what I mean?
This is a very British thing. There's there's always been a kind of weird posh people joining these kind of hippie communes of environmental protesting and things. I've seen this in television and movies a lot. It seems to be kind of like a very British thing. Posh people want to get away from their poshness by running off and joining these kind of communes, and becoming activists for a living. And then they have to run off to their dad to get all their allowance money so that they can fund their lifestyle of living in a tent camp, talking about the environment all day long, or trans, or what's called trans now. But
common people, wasn't it? That's the common people song. But again, I was thinking about the woman with her hand glued on the floor, and it is such a big. The slogan has to be extreme, which no more dead trans kids. Because really, what are the goals?
Yes.
What are the actual real goals of trans activism? Because, is it to eliminate violence against trans women? I don't think so, because this is a group that actually sees less violence than the norm. And as we were saying, is it to close the gap in wealth and opportunity? No, because most of them are really privileged and wealthy and have huge opportunities. Like all of these people are in fucking Oxford. Last night.
None of these people are worried about where the next check is going to come from.
No, and so what is the goal? Is it to prevent mental health issues? But not really, because honestly, mental health and being trans seems to go really quite sort of hand in hand. Is it the cause?
If they wanted to sort out, if they actually cared about the mental health of trans people, they wouldn't be telling people that people like Stock want them killed.
No, they certainly wouldn't say, we're in stage 6 of a genocide.
Yes, exactly.
Well, certainly this week belongs to. Oh yeah.
Someone gave us a tenner and said, "Well done, Kathleen Stock." So thank you for giving us a tenner in the name of Kathleen Stock. I really appreciate it.
And well done, Kathleen Stock, indeed. What I was just about to say was that this week totally belongs to Kathleen Stock.
Yes.
Even J.K. Rowling has done some wonderful things this week, and we can't forget about that. But Kathleen Stock's, there's that cool looking but also harrowing image of Kathleen Stock being flanked, surrounded, boxed in by a phalanx of guards, of big hulking security guards. Yeah. It's just such a shocking image. This is a philosopher, an academic who's talking about the most basic things, and to just state these basic facts. We're living in a world where she has to be surrounded by armed guards, but she did look cool as F in that picture.
So many heterosexual women thinking, maybe I'm not quite as heterosexual.
She always is cool. It's true. She's very cool and composed, but she's the most enraging person because she speaks so calmly and so clearly and eloquently, and she just takes a very moderate, reasonable, foundational position. And that is the most threatening thing. It's because she's actually quite relatable, and she does a really good job taking a very moderate, foundational position of some very core issues and lets everyone else work out the rest for themselves. That's where the rage comes from.
It's been a very bad week for them, because now everybody knows that she is just a normal lesbian woman fighting for women. That's all she is.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. She's come across as, as the intelligent, mild, reasonable, articulate woman that she actually is, with, very mild. I mean, she even said, she said, well, look, I use preferred pronouns, which a lot of people, I mean, a lot of people won't. She is really quite reasonable. And as you say, Graham, it's become really obvious. It's obvious to everyone. It's and that clip on Good Morning Britain? With Ed Balls, I don't know what it's called. Just showed her, they were really out of their depth.
Yes,
because she was so reasonable. They wanted bigotry and idiocy, but they got reasonableness, and it made them look a bit idiotic.
Can I give credit where it's due as well? I just want to mention one person who said a very interesting thing, and I'm not sure whether, looking back at it, he might be embarrassed about it, but one of the trans-identified I think they're both from Norwich, or maybe it was the same guy in different clothes, long-haired guy sitting in a kind of Aleister Crowley style.
Is it Katie John or?
No, I don't think it was Katie John. Katie John was it was very long hair and looks, not making much of an effort to look like a woman in the interview.
Oh, okay.
And he said, and excuse me for using male pronouns for him, but that's kind of the policy of the show. But he seems like a very nice guy. And he said, it's, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like, it's a question of British eccentricism.
Oh, that was Katie John who said that. Yeah.
Oh, Katie John who said that, and I thought,
Katie John said male to female. Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Well, I just thought that's a hell of a thing to admit, because that's how I always thought about, for instance, Alex Drummond. Alex Drummond, who no one would ever have heard of except for a few long-suffering friends, became famous, not because he's a bloke who wears a beard and wears a dress, but he went around saying things like he brings out the inner lesbian from people, and he was expanding the bandwidth of what it means to be a woman. These are the reasons he got into trouble, not because he's an eccentric guy who likes to wear dresses and has a beard, but because he said some incredibly offensive things about women.
Yes, exactly that.
But Katie John's an interesting one, because Katie John is a pretty moderate person. I saw Katie John speak at the Battle of Ideas Festival on a panel with Helen Joyce and James Esses last year. And Katie John acknowledges his biological sex, acknowledges that he's male. He acknowledges that he has gender dysphoria and that he underwent genital reconstruction surgery to alleviate the dysphoria, and that in his case it worked, and he had not wanted to. He had tried other means of alleviating his dysphoria. And that's about as far as I know where Katie John's positions on things are, but that's a good starting point to have discussion. He's someone who I think is, and I'm going to use he because he acknowledges his sex, so I don't think that's a problem in his case. He's someone who I think is an interesting person to engage with, because he is quite a moderate person. I probably disagree with him about a lot of things, but he's someone I can converse with. So there's an interesting value there. Just like a lot of people get really angry at Kathleen Stock because she's actually quite she's really good at introducing the other side to the other side. I think Katie John is someone that we can talk to and engage with to learn more from where the other side works. I probably disagree with him about a lot of things, and he probably would piss me off about a lot of things, but he's someone I'm very interested in talking to and paying more attention to. He's someone I don't want to bat off and dismiss because he does acknowledge biological sex and he has experienced gender dysphoria. He's an interesting one.
He does apparently use female spaces, which I
there you go. That I don't agree with. Yeah.
About people when it's not true. So no offense to people saying it, but I have to be a little bit careful here. Some people start out, like I know Debbie Hayden, for instance, began not using female spaces and now absolutely won't do it and says it in interviews. So I'd be curious about his current stance on all that, just it's worth being a little bit careful. What else? Oh yes, the choir. We have to talk about the choir. Most extraordinary moments at the end. And someone tweeted an absolutely brilliant thing about the choir. Do you mind if I just quickly look for this now? This won't take me a sec. I should have it lined up, I know, but he said surely at some point they'll realize it's simply a reimagining for the loss of religion as the totem to gather around. It depends entirely on faith over evidence, which is fine, but it can't drive society. That was Brian Spusk on Twitter. Now, the reason I love this quote is because, I mean, when you see those, I mean, that terrible song, Trans and Cis Together, it's like, it was so interesting because it's such a, that's indoctrination. That's forcing people to think something silly, right? That makes no sense, you know? But you've got to, there's a bit of my heart that kind of glows a little bit because I think of my dad. We would go to church every week, you know, he would go every day sometimes, you know, he was very religious. And, you know, there's a reason people did this, you know, there's a sense of community, there's all sorts of things. And you saw that in the song, you know, even though it was, they were, I'm afraid, just chanting a bit of propaganda. But, you know, it just made me think, I wonder, maybe after all this is done and we're, and everyone's, you know, put down the broken bottles, sorry, not us, obviously, the other side, then maybe we can have a talk about the kind of absence that religion left in society's life, you know, that it didn't.
I mean, there's certainly a sense of belonging, isn't there? I mean, to the tribe as part of it. But, you know, you just said something interesting about, you know, but we don't want to organize society around it. Society was organized around religion for a really long time, which is actually quite a frightening thought now, because it's, you know, I've always thought, well, it's ridiculous. We obviously can't organize anything around this, but people are self-organizing around it, aren't they? I mean, it really is quite a polarizing issue. And actually, you know, it doesn't even necessarily now, thinking about that Ed Balls thing with his, well, I don't believe a woman can have a penis. It's not even necessarily about what your fundamental beliefs are about sex and gender, but are you just prepared to say, but, you know, no more dead trans kids? Are you prepared to wave the flag?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
to join a group. To be in a group.
Religious observances. These are all religious observances. Someone said, oh God, again. Sometimes I'm looking for something that's like, oh, this is so cool. And it just jumps out of my head. Something to do with the religious aspect. It'll come back to me. Sorry.
Okay, let me jump in and maybe it'll come back. About the religion thing, I think it has to do with individualism versus collectivism. Most cultures are very collectivistic throughout the world and have been. In that you're born, you're given a role, you have a position within your community that is assigned to you, and you have a role, and you derive happiness and satisfaction in your life and purpose in your life by being a piece of a group. Sort of like, you know, that children's cartoon Voltron, where one person's an arm and one person's a leg and one person's a head and one person's a body, and they all come together. There's a collective there, and everybody's just happy just being a limb instead of being an individual person. And then since, I guess, the Enlightenment, the Western world, so-called, the sort of Euro-American culture, has developed an individualistic take, especially this accelerated during the Industrial Revolution, where now we derive our sense of purpose and our satisfaction by having individual life journeys and being and finding individual freedom to do what we want. And this individualistic world is very, very satisfying in many ways, especially for people who are atypical. If you are female and you were born female in a collectivist culture, you have a strict role assigned to you as to what you're going to do. You're going to make babies, you're going to gather berries. And if you're male, you're going to be hunting and you're going to be leading. And that's that, you know? And that doesn't satisfy everybody. A lot of males don't feel like that. And a lot of females don't feel like that. So the individualistic culture is much more beneficial to these people, the outliers. The women who are like, no, I don't want to make babies and gather berries. I want to lead, you know? And the men who are like, I don't want to hunt. I want to hang out with people, you know, or whatever. These are obviously extreme stereotypes to get the point. But in this individualistic culture we're living in now, we're missing something because we still want to feel a part of a collective. We still want to feel like we're part of a group. And that's what religion, I think, really did for a lot of people. So when you ask a Scientologist what Scientology is about, they don't know. You know, they literally don't know what their religion is. They just know they're part of a group, and they love that feeling of being part of a group and working for giving up their personal goals and their personal whatever to to find purpose by contributing to a group. And that's what gender identity ideology is very much becoming. You're seeing a lot of young people looking for a sense of purpose, looking for a tribe to belong to.
Well, if you're not singing, I know Americans used to sing the national anthem at the start of class. I don't know if they do that anymore. But if you're not doing all that, if you're not doing all these little ceremonies that tie you together as a group of people, fine. But what are you going to replace it with? What does go there? Because it's obvious that human beings need something. Unfortunately, we've constantly needed this, and we always fill the hole with something terrible. Aztecs throwing fucking heads downstairs.
I just became a goth. That was my ideology. We just wore lots and lots of black and complained about everyone all the time.
Yes, well, that was pretty much what I've done for the last few years. What a lot of black and just complained.
Yeah. I think this is true as well. Someone says, "Oh no, where is it?" Sorry, that was probably a good quote, but I thought I wanted to draw attention to this one. I blame music for downloading, music for killing, music's tribes. There's another thing. Tribe.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I've always felt this. Tribe. I always felt that rock music was one of the world's more successful experiments with tribalism.
Absolutely.
It was like
it's so true. That almost sounds silly what she's saying, or superficial, or like a cute little quip, but it's actually deep and profoundly true. Children need these subculture tribes to build their identities separate from their families and separate from other generations, and we've lost that now. Sorry, go on, Graham, but
it's been replaced with the tribe. It's been replaced with is unfortunately the tribe of Judith Butler. And philosophers like that, who no one knows what the fuck they're talking about. It's just, it's like, as someone said, have you ever seen anyone more influential than Judith Butler and yet less quotable? No one knows any quotes from Judith Butler,
Same with L. Ron Hubbard, same thing.
Yeah.
He's the most, literally the best-selling writer of all time is L. Ron Hubbard. No one can quote a single line of his. Literally.
It brings us back to exactly what we were saying. That woman earlier saying that, Kathleen Stock why isn't she a trans man? And no, and the response was no, because sex is real and stereotypes don't define your sex. And she was like, well, that's what I believe. and no, but it's interesting, isn't it? The belief, what the fundamental understanding and beliefs don't matter anymore. It's either are you pro-trans or are you anti-trans? That's the idea in their heads. I think we've at least got a bit more of, I do actually have goals that I want to see achieved, and then I want to get on with something else.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah, let's hope that like some of the less crazy voices that we've heard during this week win out, because even though there's obviously certain areas where certain people feel they can't compromise on. It's not going to go anywhere without talking about it, and I think this was a great week for the end of No Debate. Let me just do this because someone paid us 10 quid for it. After writing Father Ted, do you ever feel you're now living the real-time Father Ted episode? Do you see the same cult modernized and bolder? Not the same cult, but the answer is yes. It is like living in a Father Ted episode all the fucking time. It's absolutely crazy what keeps happening, and I could never have written it.
But I'm very glad to have been able to talk about it with you and people in the comments. There's been some excellent, really profound and interesting things said.
A lot of people asking for you to bring back Wine with Women, Helen.
Yes.
So
I need that list. I want to watch Wine with Women.
I can't now.
Get that going.
I can bring it back. I shall do that.
And also,
have you had Stock on Wine with Women?
Have
you had Kathleen Stock on Wine with Women?
No. That's it. I'll ask.
You should look into her. She's an up and coming feminist voice.
I'll see. Yeah, I've heard of her. She might be good.
Yeah. All right, guys.
Wait. Let's take a minute to talk about Rowling. Rowling did some great tweeting.
Oh, okay. Sure. Yeah, I haven't really been.
She's in the title of the episode, so we have to talk about her.
Oh yes,
there was that article, wasn't it? Patrick Strudwick wrote an article.
Yes.
He said out loud that Kelly J. Keane had organised a rally in Melbourne. Let Women Speak rally in Melbourne where they staged a mass Nazi salute. There was no. He didn't even do the adjacent to or attracted. He literally said it out loud. And Rowling said, enough's enough. and she wrote this long tweet, so articulate, saying, you know, what the ridiculousness of what he'd said, and then she said, and I will, you know, Kelly Jane knows where I am if she wants to take him to court. And then they took it down. They took that whole paragraph out.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Oh, that's great. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was also taken out without any explanation, without any.
Well, I don't think there was an apology, which is disappointing.
But that's because, you know, the Independent is not a real newspaper. You know, it's a step above Pink News. You know, so any respectable newspaper would publish why they did that. You know, and the fact they didn't is extraordinary, and it just shows it's not really those articles by Strudwick. They only have one intention. It's just pure propaganda.
Yeah,
you know?
It is.
It's pure black propaganda. You know, if that is a phrase, it sounds like it should be. But yeah, and what I loved about Rowling doing that and taking the time to do that is that we've known for years of what ideological capture has meant in places like The Guardian, The Independent, and the Metro, and all these places. We've known about it, you know, since Dot, and we know that that's why our positions are misrepresented and we're being smeared and so on. And she just made that clear to a massive audience. She just exposed ideological capture in the press to a huge audience for the first time, I think. So I have a feeling, as well as the end of No Debate, it might also be drawing to an end the era of people just thinking they can say anything about anyone and getting away with it, you know?
Yeah.
I have a feeling I'm in for a few more years of it, but I don't think people like Stock will be, or Kelly, or Rowling, because, you know, they have the money to fight back, you know? So it was a good week for everyone.
Great week. And then in Australia.
Let me talk to you.
Sorry, no, Artie, what were you going to say about Australia? One last thing.
Well, the Australia, the newspaper, ran a great big in-depth feature about gender dysphoria and kids and pediatric trans, and I thought it was an absolute home run. There wasn't any both sidesism. There was a representation of different viewpoints, but it was very clearly like this is a crisis. It was like finally the media is speaking. It's spreading. It was just sort of like the Times UK that was talking this way and the Specky. And now it's like, oh, we've got like more newspaper. I mean, the Australian is also a Murdoch paper, but we're seeing it more out there. That's much bolder, much more in your face.
You know, Australia has been extremely captured. So I think it was a really important piece.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then there was another piece to follow up too.
Australia. It was either the Australian or ABC ran something, and Dennis said that's a big moment. You know, Dennis is Australian, of course.
And it's tireless work from Sal Grover and Holly Lawford Smith and Catherine Deves and so many of the wonderful feminists in Australia that have been really, and many women in their political parties too, who've been really, really fighting, which is amazing. I've not seen, there's Bernard Lane, there's some men down there too, but it's it's mostly women carrying that fight almost entirely.
And then it's particularly good because she's taken out a second injunction against I'm not sure what the word is actually, against the person who called her a Nazi. So she's really taking that seriously. So it would be brilliant to see one of these people exposed in the courts on this stuff. Okay. Look, I better try and wind it up, or what'll happen is I'll fuck up the ending when it does come along. Thank you so much for joining us. There's 642 people watching. That's a big number, isn't it, for us?
Oh, that's great. Fantastic. And listen, like we're only halfway through the week, so let's just enjoy this great sort of really feeling the wind in our backs.
See you tomorrow morning around 11 a.m.
Yeah. All right, guys.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.